Who's got it? Hey, welcome.
You got it.
To another week of
tonight.
Tampa.
Welcome.
Tampa Fishing Outfitters.
Don't choke under pressure over there.
No,
we got the full crew finally here. We've got Captain Rick Liles.
Well, we were kind of under distress there. Who was going to do the bringing ins?
Yeah,
Rick's been in the woods too long.
I've been
had to talk.
It complicates things a little bit with all of us here, but we've got Travis, we've got Jason, you got myself. We're going to talk some fishing tonight, get into some reports for those of us that have been braving the cold the last couple days.
It's January.
It
is definitely January.
It's
January.
Miserable.
But I know we're going to talk about, I know in the kind of that segment after we get out of our reports, we were all kind of talking about sheep's head, and I'm sure that's all on the potential game plan. It probably has been the last couple days. Will be with this next front we're getting Monday is going to be pretty hardcore.
It's kind of tough the last couple. Well, I don't know about today, but Monday and Tuesday sheephead fishing was out with the winds.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Bay fishing anyway.
Bay fishing.
Correct.
Out there fishing
I don't
deeper.
think I sheep's head fish if I ain't going in the bay. I don't know. The ones on the docks just don't cooperate
And
with
you
me.
both.
I think there's certain technique. I think it's
You might be right. I don't have that technique down.
It's like
it's like
inshore sheep's head fishing.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's sort of what I found with sheep's head fishing, and I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of like you guys too. I don't do a lot of it on charters because it's sort of I don't know.
Boring.
If the task is to go catch sheep's head, you know, it can be done. But like you're like butted up against somebody's dock, or you're butted up against
scraping
a
stuff off.
seawall, or
hey, don't mind me. I'm over here scraping your piling for you.
It's not the most
free of charge.
You know, sporty type fishing sometimes.
Sure.
But, you know, if the idea is to catch fish and get it done, then you can do it.
I think though, from our standpoint, if you try to, because it's a little different situation when you got people paying you to take them fishing.
Sure.
You're trying for numbers, and sheephead fishing, at least my experience, and I'm no great sheephead fisherman, but sheephead fishing around docks and that kind of thing, it's a very patient game.
Yeah.
If you want to catch a good one, now you can go. There's places that you can go catch all the
dinks,
6 or 8 inches you want, but to catch something to take home and clean, that's you just at least my experience in the river and around docks and in the canals, you just don't go catch a bunch like that.
Yeah.
So for pay, that's kind of a tough gig.
Yeah. I'll agree with you, and I know we're going to get into that, like, and really kind of dissect this and all our different strategies on how we target, sheep's head this time of year. So I'm looking forward to it because I don't have a ton of experience. I do it now, but I did it when I was younger, but up until the point I started guiding, sheep's head, kind of like when we talk about mackerel, was one of those things.
Just didn't go.
Just didn't go do that.
I can tell you that the area that you've primarily fished out of, or sort of marketed yourself, here as of late, up in that Gandy northern part of the bay. It's a really good place to go sheepshead fishing.
Yeah, I'm learning that.
You know, oyster bars, structure, sea walls, rock piles. You know,
Bridges.
more of the industrial side of fishing in our area.
Yeah.
You know, the ports. You know, Tampa,
Yeah.
McKay Bay, Palm Rivers, Alafai Rivers. You know, places like that are where a lot of, in my opinion, those bigger sheepshead, you know, sort of are. If you can't get out and do the bay fishing type thing. So that's my opinion. But like you said, we can talk about that here in a little
Well,
bit.
and I want to clarify something because you know, some of the people from out of town that are watching our show.
Oh,
There
yes.
are two different types of sheep's
correct.
head,
We're talking
and
about
I don't know
the
much
tactical.
about the sheep's head up north, except for
They're
they
apart.
are a junk
Yeah,
fish.
they're
Yeah.
apart. Ours are
They
not.
are different.
Yeah.
They are different. Our sheep's head are actually pretty good fighting. They're really good eating. It's something we actually target,
Fun
and
to
they're
clean,
not
like
considered.
it's fun
No,
to
they're
clean a whole
definitely
lot.
not fun to
It's like
clean.
having a knife fight with a gladiator.
Yeah.
We're definitely not a junk fish
But,
here. There are cold water species that honestly between that and the bonnethead sharks save our rear ends on them 30-degree days because when you get on the flats when it's that cold, or even the river creeks and stuff, it's just tough. You'll catch a few reds and stuff, but you know it's been days where you can go on a river or a creek or a flat and you just know you're gonna struggle. Or if you're on the sheepshead spawn, you can go out there, and I've wrecked the sheepshead. Had a banner day on sheepshead on a day that I know everything else
Right.
was going to be tough. So it's a good cold water fish for us.
Seems like
It
the
is
high
a-
pressure don't bother the sheephead. as bad.
No, they
No.
don't. And
No.
and it is a major gear shift for me. Probably one of the hardest gear shifts
What's up, Ty?
that I do during the year, because going from chucking whitebait in the river and just nonstop action to sheepshead fishing. Like,
But I tell you what, man, you can
Falling
get
asleep
on,
with
you
a
can
rod.
get on a sheep's head bite, and you can get it rolling. You can get it pretty hot, man. You know, fiddler up, son.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you fiddler up, do the shrimp thing. You can make it happen. You can have a good day doing it. But
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about what we've been doing over the last
Week.
couple weeks.
Mhm.
I've still been getting whitebait. I know, Jason, you've been getting whitebait. Rick, you and I went and got whitebait Monday, in Hurricane January.
Yeah.
But so we've been still doing the whitebait thing. As long as me personally, I can still get the whitebait. And I always kind of look at the water temperature. You
Mhm.
know, like because there's days, and we talk about it a lot, where having live bait, whitebait, pilchards, greenbacks in our area, versus having say live shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
You change the style in the way you fish. You change sort of the fish you may target, et cetera, et cetera. And so, really, a lot of the times when we leave out or we're going to run a trip, bait is sort of a big reason or a deciding factor on what we're going to go do and what we're going to fish for
Exactly.
that day. And for me, water temperature is a key element to whether or not, even if you have white bait, those fish are going to react and you can get
Right.
something going with the white bait. So as we roll into these cold fronts and they sort of are starting to bring us down the stable, the regular temperature starting to get down, the average temperature starting to get down now. And so I will have some shrimp and some white bait if I can get it to sort of play
Yeah.
the mid-afternoon when it warms
When
up.
it gets that really
and
cold
then-
point, you kind of use that, like that white bait. To me, becomes like a secondary thing. Like you
Right.
definitely want to get your shrimp because you feel you have that confidence level that when it gets that cold, that's really what they're going to want. And I'm going
And
to
you have
put
options.
in front of them.
And you have options.
And you have options. But I'm always, if it's available, regardless of how cold it is, I'll
For sure.
try to put some greenbacks in the well.
For sure. So we've been still getting white bait.
Mhm.
The snook and the trout. The bite has actually slowed down for me a little bit on the snook, just based on the water temps and sort of the conditions. But when you hit it just right, that tide's moving really good,
Mhm.
or you get some clear skies with some bright sun.
Yeah.
You can fish some
Like
some
some warming
shallow,
condition.
sandier areas and really sort of pinpoint the timing on the snook. I think the snook bite's been pretty good.
Yeah.
But I'd
considering
say
we're in January, it's been really good.
it's been good. But I'm just saying, like, it's not like an all day thing. Like you can't
No.
just roll up and start catching fish. It's sort of very time specific, tide specific, weather specific. But there's plenty of fish around. We've been having a good snook bite. More importantly, the trout bite's been pretty good for us.
Yeah.
We've still been catching some quality
For
trout. What I like about the trout is, for me, the trout is sort of doable with shrimp or with white bait. If it's too cold for them to bite on the white bait or get a good bite going on white bait, even chumming, then I'll switch to a shrimp. And we've seen to been able to catch fish even in times when they're not as active chasing down a live bait.
So a question then, we probably all have our own takes on that. So let's say you've got both, all right? You've got whitebait and shrimp in the well. Are you just putting 2 out there, whatever one bites first, we switch, or what point are you like dialing over to one or the other?
I think Jason and I are a lot alike on this, but I'm going to use that shrimp when the whitebait's gone.
Yeah.
All right, I'm with you. Yeah.
I'm a little different.
Yeah, I know you are. I may sneak one out with the shrimp, but
right.
Man, unless I'm sheephead fishing.
Yeah. Let me tell you what. I'll tell you a
just all about the
story,
whitebait.
and if anybody's been out fishing, and I'd say the last month, especially if you've been using whitebait and you've thought that maybe getting your chum bat out of the back and just slinging a bat full out there might be a good thing, you've noticed that the birds are just
on point.
insane. And
I
so,
got
falling back
one.
on the whole shrimp thing,
Yeah.
You're fishing 1.5 2 foot of water. The turns are diving to the bottom.
Yeah, they're
to
bumping their nose
to
on
get
the
the
bottom
baits.
of the
If you put a shrimp out there, not necessarily for the snow.
Dude, let him tell a story. He's so
Finish
excited
what
over there.
But on trout,
It's like itching.
we were
You
using
got ants in the pants, man.
Hey, we were using those big jumbo shrimp, and we were throwing them out there, and they weren't coming down and getting the shrimp. They were actually able to fish the fish. As soon as you throw whitebait out there, even if you took the cork off, put a weight on it, they still saw that whitebait flashing through the clear water, and they were hammering it. But they wouldn't eat a shrimp.
Yesterday they were eating the shrimp unless I put a split shot on it.
Okay.
And then they couldn't get to it.
Okay.
But
if it's on the surface, and it's between.
Well, you pop,
the water column.
I do a lot of trout fishing with popping cork. So when you pop it, that shrimp comes up a little bit, and they're on it. But my story at the bridge Monday, and Travis was there. He didn't see it, but I got to be like a minority on has had this happen. I'm standing beside my live well, and it's open.
Oh.
I got a turn that dropped out of the sky and dove into my live. I mean, he went under, bloosh, and just like he does out in the water, he did that. I mean, there's not much opening there. This guy was like a fighter pilot ace, dude. He hit the spot and went completely. I heard a splash and I looked, and he's coming up. Now
he got out.
It's been bad.
He got out. If I'd have been thinking, I'd have just shut the lid on him.
Yeah.
Let him stay in there a little bit and see how he liked it. But
I
mean, think about it. If you ever had a bird. I mean, I know they'll stand on the side of your live well and they'll pick baits and stuff. But have you ever had one come from 30 foot up and completely submerge in your live well?
No.
Not having that, man. I was there. I had just done the net.
You had just booted one right before that.
Yeah, well, I pointed one out of the boat. They got a little close to me.
Yeah.
But
well, we've been talking about that. I mean, that day, the windy day where your boat and my boat was one of the only ones out there catching bait. Like right before you guys rolled up, I was losing my mind because I was bringing the net and just getting attacked. Like with bait all over the deck. I mean, there's a dozen birds inside the boat. There's 12 more flying above me. I've got bird crap everywhere. Baits that I've stepped on, baits that they've stepped on, and I can't even move around. I can't even load my net. And those pelicans are so big, they can't even really fly out of the boat. I'm like having to coax them up to the front. Mixed waves and wind. I was like, I
haven't seen. It's been weird. I haven't seen. I've had issues where birds are flying over and they're messing with you.
Yeah.
That whole jazz. But I've never gotten to the point where they're getting in the boat.
Yeah.
Like they're landing on your boat, and like when
not scared.
When you shake the net out in the basket, and a couple of them are flopping around on the deck, the birds are coming in the boat, landing, and walking around your boat and eating the bait.
The difference.
Nuts.
Normally, when a bird does land on your boat in that situation, we've all seen it happen over the years. You take one step towards it, he's gone.
Right.
Right now, you could go up and pet him, and
they'll
he
meet
will
you
not
in the
move.
middle.
Yeah, he'll be like, "You better move. That's my bait. You're trying to put in your rod."
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, that's how it's been. I saw that Chris put in a comment here about
the fort
not seeing it this bad lately, and I've been fishing the fort a lot, Chris. You're right, man. There's times where you can't do anything. It doesn't matter if it's for me. It doesn't matter if it's a shrimp or a whitebait, a cork or a split shot.
Well, I'll tell you,
they're just all over.
What was that
I've been
about
using.
22?
Matt's got a question.
What was that about the
there
22?
too.
Who wrote that?
22 will
Jace?
solve your problems.
I want
or create new ones for you.
I want a little more horsepower on that shot.
Air horns, yeah. I mean, I guess we got to get creative on our new tactics because they've obviously adapted.
Oh,
because
they just take their chances. It's like they're just gonna do what they do. But I've been using split shots and actually catching a lot of fish.
Yeah.
and it's actually it's working pretty good.
Matt had a question. Go back up there to Matt's question.
Yeah, Matt Gatos was asking about what size shrimp do you buy? Do you get most, and how do you mix it up with the species? For me, generally, Matt, because lately it's been a secondary bait, I tend to just buy mediums. I'll be honest. I like to have those larges if my confidence level is low that either I can catch bait or that they're going to prefer shrimp that day, then I'm mixing larges, maybe selects. I don't do selects a whole lot, but I'll go to heavy on larges. But if I'm pretty sure I'm getting bait and I'm using shrimp for maybe something specific within a trip that's not going to be the full trip, I'll generally just buy mediums, because typically with this, I'm still snapper fishing right now, sheep's head fishing. I go through the shrimp a lot faster, and I want them to be smaller. So that's just my take on it. Is generally I buy mediums when I feel like it's going to be more of a primary bait for me, large.
Well, where I get shrimp, you don't get a choice.
Okay.
It's the variety scoop.
It's the variety scoop.
Yeah.
So
I'll take a dozen shrimp.
Right.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Usually get the better end of that deal.
Yes.
No, for sure. I like the jumbos or the large. I'm with Ernie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm up with Big Scrimp.
Mm-hmm.
Big Scrimp. That's Ernie's name. But I like the bigger ones, and part of the reason is because I like to be able to have usable baits.
Mm-hmm.
To where you can cast them further. You could target a big snook or
Right.
something that's going to give me a little more action. I'm all into my opinion. I like it when those bigger shrimp click and clack. They tend to give you a little more action if you can consider it action on a shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
But also, what I found is if I buy those and consider it like an investment, because it is like sort of a secondary bait. So if I buy those larger shrimp, I'll freeze them, and then when I do start doing some sheep's head fishing,
Got the bags ready to go.
you got those larger shrimp. You get 2 or 3 baits out of one, or if you're gonna do some snapper fishing. So it's sort of for me. You can kind of use it in several different avenues. Even if they're alive, you can break them apart. We did that with Ernie snapper fishing the last time we went out. We got a bunch of big shrimp, and we actually caught a few small grouper, some bigger mangroves, and then they reel up a half a shrimp. I'm like, I'll just pitch it back down. And you sort of
Sometimes in the winter you got to be careful with the big baits.
For sure.
Because
Yeah.
with fish with their metabolism slowing, they will not want a big bait.
Yeah.
There's times that they will
The second, and I think
want a smaller bait.
the part of the question that I think he already nailed it is inside that question that he asked, what are we typically buying, and does the targeted species affect it? For me, the targeted species is generally what makes the decision. If it's
It depends on too, what else you've got. If it's a secondary bait, or I've ran 3 or 4 trips now this year where all I've had was shrimp. I had no white bait, I had no pinfish, I had no cut bait, no nothing. Which is another one I want to throw out there too. Is 2 of those days we caught a handful of ladyfish, and we used some cut bait for for redfish, and we caught a few redfish on the cut bait. So you can sort of
give and take.
add that
play
to
the
mix.
game.
It's just it's a different style. It's a different speed of fishing. When you're not using white bait, it's a little bit more complacent. You got to be a little more patient. There's not a lot going on. I mean, let's face it. When you show up with white bait, you chuck a bat out there, and the whole water comes alive.
Right.
It gets people excited.
The air has been coming alive, though. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's been bad.
Well, the birds got to
But-
eat too. They're just they've been bad. This is the worst I've seen in my years of guiding,
me too.
which is
It's
pretty good
It's
bit.
pretty bad. Man.
I'm probably not the only one wondering. So you talked about that ladyfish, right? And that's cut baiting right now is not something I do a whole lot of. Are you scaling down the size of your cut bait? Like your ladyfish steak that you're making today, are they any different than they are in June or whatever?
It depends on what I'm doing for a redfish.
Yeah.
It's going to be a smaller chunk. It's
Yeah.
going to be about a 1 inch.
They're
Almost
just gonna
like
pick
just
up
a
on
nice
that
little
scent.
chunk where you can throw it out there, get a nice decent cast. The one thing nice about cut bait this time of year is you don't have as many pinfish and other small fish to sort of peck at that cut bait. So you can use a little bit smaller bait, in my opinion. But like you said, these fish, their metabolisms are down there. Their diet's not quite as heavy as it would be,
Right.
in other times of the year. So for even trout, and that's another one I want to throw out there too, because people don't think about it, but a big trout will eat a piece of cut bait, mullet,
No problem.
ladyfish, pinfish, easily. You catch a big trout fishing potholes. But if I'm gonna target the big snook, which I haven't yet this year, I really haven't gone looking for big snook and sat and sort of fished for those. But if I was going to target some bigger snook, I would go with definitely a bigger size bait for those fish. Reason being is, in my opinion, because I have cut baited snook this time of year, a lot of the places that the snook are sitting, the bigger snook, there's a lot of catfish around them.
Mm-hmm.
Residential docks, deep muddy bottom creeks and stuff like that. And if you use a smaller bait, a lot of times you'll catch, bycatch before you get to that big snook sometimes.
You can weed with the bigger bait. You'll weed out a lot of those catfish that just can't handle it.
Right.
So,
And that's
plus, the bigger the snook, the smaller
specifically
that bait is going to be to that fish.
Yeah.
right. The area that I'm fishing, and that's sort of relative to what I'm talking about. Because if you're fishing bridges and passes and other things like that, it may not be as, the same scenario there. But in the areas that I'm fishing that I would fish for the big snook, that's the take I would take.
Well, the one thing, we're talking about January fishing, and the first thing that comes to mind, besides what we're talking about, is something that I think we should touch on, and I like to touch on every time this year, is safety, because this is about the time of year where you hear about somebody that went out when they shouldn't, either A, because they're not educated, they're educated themselves on the weather, or they just not being smart. And this time of year, guys, don't go out if the weather's bad. Don't play that game, because you can lose, and there's not a whole lot of
run and beat a front.
The NFL players, it was this time of year. I rescued an older couple. They were in the water, boat flipped over. It was this time of year. I think there was another situation last year. I can't remember. There's been a few. It seems like they always pop up this time of year because the cold fronts are common, and they're frequent, and they're stacked on top of each other, and they're harsh. So, guys, use this time of year when the weather's good. Do your fishing. Go out there, get the sheep's head, do your snook, do your redfish, but also use this time of year to get caught up. Check your, and we need to do a segment. Check your bearings on your trailer. Do your trailer maintenance. Do your boat maintenance. Clean out your tackle drawers. Don't go out there when the weather's horrible, because it's just downright dangerous.
Yeah.
And fall in the water in the summer is bad, but fall in the water when it's 55 to 60 degrees is a lot worse.
Cost you your life.
Yeah, yes, and ultimately that's what we've seen. So I do want to say that, guys, be careful. Use your head. Look at the weather. With the smartphones, there's plenty of apps out there. Yeah. Also use common sense, because I can tell you, with all the technology out there, I don't think these guys really have a clue of what's going on sometimes with the wind. These wind reports are put out there, but in my experience, when you have a cold front come through, they're typically delayed on what they say.
Yeah, or it can be moved around. And you know what we should talk? You mentioned the apps and the sources we get our weather. We should talk about that after we take this break and before we get into Sheep's Head.
I like it.
Consortium.
I like it. Guys, stay tuned. You're watching Tampa Fishing Outfitters Live Fishing Report. Check this out, and we'll be right back.
Be right back. Guys, we're back. Tampa Fishing Outfitters Live Fishing Report. You've got all four of us. I know we saw 4 for the price of 3 in the comments there. Feels like what you're getting. But you've got Captain Ray,
still only
Captain
equals
Travis,
like 1
Captain Jason, and myself. Right before we cut out, I know we got a bunch of sheep's head talk to do. Real quick, like within 30 seconds, let's talk about where you're getting, each of us, where you're getting your weather source. Where are you getting your winds? Where are you getting?
I get it from Cell Flow, or which Jason turned me on to, or just the Weather Channel app.
Weather Channel app, okay.
Cell Flow is okay. It seems like it used to be better. Wind Finder used to be okay. It sucks too. They pretty much all suck, but they give you a baseline.
Nice, great advice.
You want me to? I can't polish a turd.
Yeah, that's true.
I do Sail Flow, so I'll use Sail Flow as sort of like at my hands. and then I also use the NOAA. So I'll go and kind of cross-reference that, and then I like to use the Klystron 9 for like weather. Like if I'm gonna use for weather radar that I
to
can
look
pull
at
up
your
on my
fronts
phone.
like rain and all that.
Yeah, for that type of stuff, I'll pull it up.
The timing of it.
The Klystron.
Well, I
It's
tell you
pretty
what I
accurate,
use.
man.
It's actually been pretty accurate on as far as rain. Is WeatherBug. If you go on there hourly, like say there's a front moving in, you're not sure. It's been pretty darn good, I have to say, on when it's gonna rain. Like if there's a front moving in with you got the rain coming with the front.
And then the other one that we didn't talk about was tides. So you gotta kind of play wind and tide with each other.
Yeah.
On the Android, I don't know if you guys have it on the Apple stuff, but there's one called Tides.
Yeah, it's called Tides
It's
with
just
a
called
little
Tides.
blue
It's a
symbol.
little
That's what I
swirly
use. It's pretty
symbol,
cool.
and it's really good because I went through a bunch of them, and a lot of them don't actually show you a chart, like a graph.
Yeah, I like
And this one's really nice because it shows you the traditional graph.
gotta have
easy
pictures.
to look at.
Got the
Dude,
I'm with you
the
there.
numbers throw me off. I'm
If
like,
I
you
can
know,
do the numbers.
If you can't get
but
that app, Tides 4, the number 4 fishing.com. I don't know if they have an app, and I could be wrong. I use it I just go through my web browser on my phone.
Right.
But that one's I've seen Tides.
Right.
My buddy Kevin used that a lot. I've seen the same kind of layout, but it's also a source for salooners, moon phases, stuff like that if you're into it. But real quick, you talked about Windfinder, Sailflow, Windy, WeatherBug. So I use Windfinder and Sailflow as kind of like in the next few days, what is the wind going to look like? But for me, what I find to be most accurate, the end-all be-all, is when that marine forecast from Bay News 9 comes out. I seldom find them to be wrong.
Hey,
and
Josh.
They generally don't. They're generally not wrong on the under. So like when we talk about Windfinder things, I found it's calling for 10, and I'm out there in 17 to 20. Bay News 9 generally will overshoot it, and they'll tell you it's going to be 15, 20 knots today, and it could be maybe a little bit. You might be on the better
So that's
side
a good
of that.
local source, definitely for the local guys.
Yep.
And I don't know how
they have a 3-part marine forecast now where they'll do Tampa Bay, Nature Coast, and I'm pretty sure they've got one for south
that's
of us.
pretty
So
sweet.
They've
So-
opened it up a little bit. But anyway,
Bay News 9 was probably the only savior that kept me with Spectrum, and then Spectrum just sucked that much that I really didn't care.
yeah, I just use the Bay News
So
9
now-
app now.
I did like the local news on there because it runs I used to look at Bay News 9. They were pretty good, but I ended up switching. They had to go to Verizon.
The local news seems to always have try to give you like a more of a Chamber of Commerce type weather, and they don't really.
It's very boilerplate.
And,
Yeah.
and they always instead of erring on the side of caution, they err on the side of what's going to look better for the area as far as
Promotion.
Well, I
tourist
took
and that kind of thing. And
I took a meteorologist guy fishing. I was just like,
That's
what
right.
do you guys?
I use Klystron 9 radar.
I said, what do you guys look at? And he pretty much is like, well, we're just taking, we take the
Educated
science and educated
Based on
guess
what
is
they
what he
have.
said. I'm like, thank you, because what gets me though is when I walk outside and when your truck, when I used to trailer, I'd say if I get to the ramp and my door blows open on my truck, I need to go home. But when the door blows open and then I open the app and it still says 10 knots, I'm like, this is where the common sense don't kick in. They walk out and repredict the wind. I mean, it's not 10 knots.
Well, and what you got to remember too is there's so much that goes on with that. Like even to the point of like what's going to be in St. Pete versus what's going to be on Ruskin's side. It could be blowing 30 miles an hour, but if you're standing on St. Pete, out of the northwest, and if you're on
that's what I think.
the St. Pete
Windfinder,
side,
those apps like Windfinder and Sailflow give you is
you're
they
not
let
going
you
to feel
pick
that.
your fishing location and get the best information for that.
And in their defense, there's nothing to slow the wind on the water.
No.
It just.
Yeah, and you got residual. If it's blowing 25
Buoy
knots
data.
overnight.
Yeah, I used to use live buoy data, not as much because I need to know what it's going.
The best
to
of it
be.
is, here's the difference between.
I know what it is right now when I'm on the water.
Yeah.
I can tell you exactly
the difference
what it is.
difference
When I'm
between
taking them
it is,
over the
like,
bow, it ain't good.
we got to try to answer to customers because when events happen,
Set the
there's
stage
always
for what it's
questions,
gonna
and
be
you got to try to be a meteorologist and a weather guy to go, hey, I think we're going to be all right to get bait. I think we're going to be all right to fish. Maybe we should wait this time, et cetera, et cetera. And so for us, it's sort of sometimes more important that we use those tools to like forecast specific days.
Out.
But I think more importantly, like Jason touched on, is that most people, the weather doesn't come until, like you said, they kick the door open at the boat ramp and they're loaded down to go, and just make good decisions on what you're going to do based on
make sure
those
that
conditions.
you don't
You know,
you're not so attached to a plan that you're not willing to change it.
And I think, you know, if you watch our show consistently, you'll actually be able to kind of tell, at least in our eyes, what we think is safe or doable based on our reports, because that's why we talk about transitioning into some sheepshead fishing, transitioning into backwater creeks and canals and all this type of stuff. Yes, there's a case in point, that's where a lot of the fish are, but it's also where some of the safest places and more opportunistic places for us to go fish.
Or even comfortable, like
you know?
just being comfortable with your clients on board.
If most of the guides in Tampa Bay are fishing canals and creeks, don't be the guy sitting out in the middle of the bay trying to, you know,
hang on for
dear life and expect to get, you know, not your tail handed to you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's you just got to be careful with the weather. You really do. The apps are not going to be exact. They're going to be off. They're typically, my experience on the wind, they're delayed. If they say the wind's coming down at 10 o'clock, it typically don't come down till 10 o'clock a.m. They typically don't come down until about 7 or 8 that night. You know, we're sitting at the dock trying to get bait at 9 o'clock in the morning, scratching our head, watching them break over the beach at Little Harbor.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just it is a science. It's not exact.
So let's talk a little sheepshead. We got the folks zoned in. We told them we were going to talk some sheephead. So if you've got any questions about sheepshead, fire them off there. We're going to just start off the hip talking a little sheepshead fishing. Maybe talk some rigging, talk some techniques, talk some area that we fish.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of bust out and say, you know, it starts with me with water temperature and then the bait situation, kind of zoning in. If I can get fiddler crabs, I'll get fiddler crabs. Choice being to be out in the middle of the bay, fishing on the rock piles, fishing on spawning fish in deep water, you know, where you've got schools of sheepshead, you know, congregated in an area that you can consistently keep a bite going and sort of weed through the small ones and get to some bigger fish that are, you know, ready for the fillet table. If you can't do that, like we've talked about residential canals, the rivers, shell bottom, oyster bars, you know, things that attract sheepshead. It's a little different than like snook and the trout and the reds, where their food source is more live bait and crabs and sort of, you know, animals, whereas opposed to sheepshead are, you know, oysters and barnacles
Things fixed to
and
something.
crustaceans, you know, specifically. So you can put yourself, you know, closer to those fish by targeting areas, you know, that they're going to normally be feeding in. That's kind of where I would say it. The only thing I would say about sheepshead fishing that always comes up, you know, the limit on sheepshead is pretty substantial, you know, and there's times where you can catch a lot of sheepshead. You know, don't get greedy with the sheepshead. Take a few that you need for dinner, handful.
You'll regret it at the fillet table anyways.
You'll regret it at the fillet table. And always keep the little bit bigger ones.
Yeah.
There's the legal limit's 12 inches.
Right.
But
15 is about where.
14's where I'd
14, 15
tell
is
people
my number.
14's is what we're keeping.
It's sheepshead. What I've seen, having done a lot more of it in the last couple of years since starting this as a career path, the difference between like a 17-inch, the meat yield off a 17-inch sheepshead compared to like a 13 or 14 is enormous. Like in my eyes,
there's
it's
nothing
enormous.
on a 12.
There's nothing on it. I mean, you get like this little piece that you can. I mean, it's almost not worth killing a fish. Well, in my eyes, it's not. But then a 17, get a nice big.
But dial in tackle, Jason. Take tackle. What do we tackle? We're all about the same.
As far as line,
yeah, you know, so
use my inshore rods, 10-pound braid, you know, 2500 series reel. I use a Daiwa BG, St. Croix rod, 10 to 7, same 8 foot. I don't change rods or tackle. The only thing I'll do is I actually a buddy of mine, John Chapman, has these things called the hog balls, and I've been trying them. They work good for sheep. They work great for hogfish. Suppose they work good for sheep. I haven't used them yet, but any kind of weighted, I usually use split shot with a circle hook. You can use a jig head. Technically, I think that's illegal now. I'm not sure on the exact ruling on that, however you want to call it. Yeah, I don't even know how they rate that, but you can use a split shot. I typically use the minimum amount of weight I can get away with to get it down. Then that depends if you're fishing a newer full moon or quarter tides, you're on slack tide. Like I said earlier, I fish in the middle of the bay. I don't really dock fish for sheepshead. I've got some pretty good numbers in various spots where there's good lime rock ledges that used to be a lot better than what they are now. But I also don't sheepshead fish as much as I used to. So,
Right.
And you
but-
did something that is probably as many people has done what you did on sheephead as have seen a turn dive in their live well. You caught one on a whitebait.
I have in the river. I did
That's
a big
crazy.
one, a big one.
I'll tell you
Big one.
something else too.
I've
that
caught them on artificial.
Artificial.
I've caught them on jigs.
Ty and I were partners last year for the Florida Pro. On tournament day, or I forget what tournament it was, but anyways, we're fishing, and I mean, he comes tight on fish in an area where we've been plucking redfish, and it was January. Somebody was a TBRT, something small. I'm telling you, he was knocking big sheep's head out of the park on a Houdini paddle tail.
Really?
I'm talking.
I think it's more of a
every
reaction
time
strike.
he hit and he came tight, I'm thinking, yes, we got us a fish,
We got the one.
dude, and we're in 2 feet of water,
Giant sheep.
giant sheeps. I mean, so I'd never seen that happen before. You
I've
mentioned a
never.
whitebait. I've never really
Yeah.
seen an artificial.
I've only caught one on
but not
whitebait.
consistently.
I've caught
Yeah,
a
I
you
mean,
know
it's not-
Just
probably
one.
2 or 3. I've
I
actually got a picture on one of my
Couldn't believe it.
Facebook pages with it. But
Ty, if you're watching, man, I know we got some pictures of that thing with the paddle tail hanging out of his mouth, and you have to share that because it was nuts.
to kind of add what Jason to the rigging side of things, you know, one of the things that I'll normally do is use the smallest hook I can get away with, and then traditionally like the smallest bait.
Yes.
like, And one of the reasons is you know you hear the whole story about sheepshead being bait snatchers, you know, nabbers, convicts, you know, et cetera, and what it really boils down to is they're pretty crafty, you know, dudes when it comes to getting bait off of a hook.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the old saying of, you know, you gotta set the hook on a sheep's head before he bites, kind of deal. I mean, it's true, you know, and that's one of the things that when you really get it dialed in, like with sheep's head fishing.
And again, we're not talking about the northern sheephead.
No.
We're talking about
Our sheep's
because
head.
Gary said that it's his last fish on his fish to eat, and man, sheephead's just
It's hard
it's
to imagine.
good.
it's
Clean.
hard.
Yeah.
It's good, clean meat.
It's good.
Which, as ugly as they are, you
Go ahead.
if
I
you
didn't- I
didn't know,
didn't
you'd
mean
have
to-
No, you're good. And much like other species that we fish for, you know, our snook and our redfish, depending on conditions, you know, one of the things that you got to look for is water clarity, the depth that you're fishing. You may have to downgrade your tackle pretty substantially to get sheep's head to bite sometimes. Like I've dropped down to like 15-pound
15-pound
leader, you know, especially,
Small.
you know, I did a lot of fishing up in the McKay Bay area, Palm River, you know, around that area growing up. And I can remember a lot fishing on John boats, fishing along the pylons underneath the big, you know, ship docks. And there was times where there was giant sheep's head, you know, in several areas. And it made all the difference to either, you know, put a little small bait in and bury that hook in that bait
Yep,
and drop
hide
down
it
on
down.
them. And sometimes, you know, we would always try to use heavy leader, 30, 40-pound test, believe it or not, because some of these sheep's head, you know, they're 5 pounds. And when they take you back underneath
can
that
get you under
structure, you know, you want to be able to get them out. And so my point to that was sometimes you can just make a simple change as downgrading your leader and maybe, you know, decreasing the size of your hook, and you'll start catching fish
Yeah.
instantly as opposed to even though you're seeing them and they won't bite.
So for people in the audience that have, let's say that you'd had coming, like I had at one point, very limited sheep's head experience. What's your starting terminal tackle look like? What's the leader size? How long? Is it longer, shorter? You know, where are you rigging the split shot? Like, walk me through a sheep's head rig when you leave the dock. I know it could adjust. You might have to go clear.
My favorite is a number 1 live bait hook,
Uh-huh.
J hook style. Number 1, about 3 feet, a 20-pound leader. And like Jason said, you start adding split shots till you find that point. Like with
So
its
you're
tie,
okay
with
to
its
add
current.
multiple split shots
Oh,
if
yeah.
needed?
Oh
okay,
yeah.
All right.
Normally I'll start with 1. You know, depending on the size. And I keep a variety of sizes on the boat, but depending on what depth we're in, depending on the current and things like that. But I'll generally use that rig and then work from there. And the minor adjustments would be really the leader size and
Yeah.
the size of the weight.
Right.
I used to use a knocker rig on them and did fine.
You can do the
Yeah.
knocker
I
rig.
just it's just
You'll
not as
find
easy
a
as
lot of the,
as
like
a
if you were to go
split shot.
downstairs and walk over to kind of the pre-made rigs, you'll find a lot of rigs that from other parts of Florida where people make the pre-made rigs, all the sheep's head rigs they're making are knocker
knocker
rigs.
rigs. Yeah, it's just more of a if you want to
Yeah,
add weight or
I've
something,
used
it's,
it,
you just don't
when
have
we're
as much
talking about
flexibility.
some of the more bay fishing, like on the reefs, I could see that working. It generally, like we talked about, when I've sheep's head fished, it's been weather dictates I stay in the back somewhere out of the wind. And in that situation, the what you just described, that's it for me.
Yeah.
Starting with one split shot. There is a hook though. It's made by O'Hero, so it's the Trident brand, and it's called an all-purpose bait hook. That in like size 1 or 2, like you've been talking about, not 1 out, not 2 out, but in those sizes, I found the hookup ratio for somebody who can't feel that bite as much is, because it's just got that offset eye, but it still looks like a J hook. I found it to be a reliable hook, and I've recommended that to some people that were trying to get more into that over the last few weeks, and they've come back with saying, you were right.
Yeah.
And these are people who are telling me, I can't stand sheep's head fishing, not because I can't find them, but because I can't get them in my boat. Or
They're frustrating.
They are.
When they got a very small mouth and they don't take big bites.
No,
They're used to gnawing on oysters and crustaceans and crushing, and so they don't generally come out full bore and take a bait. They're normally they kind of munch on it, and so that smaller hook, if you think about it, it gives you it's like a full bite for them.
It increases the odds they're going to get it in their mouth, and you're going to be able to
Exactly.
feel it and set the hook. Now, you made the comment you have to set the hook before the fish even you feel the bite. I've heard that. I think we all probably have.
They'll make a Baptist preacher drink is how bad sheephead fishing can be.
I like that. They will.
If you're not yanking up and not hooking fish, like if you're just sitting there and you're going like this and you're sheep's head fishing, you probably ain't wrecking them. Because when it goes down, the guy on the front of the boat whiffs just as many times as he hooks up.
Sure.
Because every nibble, you're just you're on it. You know what I mean? And what you'll find is the more reactive you are to every little nibble, not necessarily yanking like a madman, but starting to dial in exactly what that
Put some
feels like.
tension in that line.
When you get that bump and you get that little bit of tension, you better go.
Yeah.
Let them start to swim off with it.
Just
I
a touch.
I usually
And
try
that's what
to-
you'll feel.
That's what I mean. You'll feel that constant tension.
When I try to describe it, it's like I see these breakthroughs happen on the boat with somebody who's never caught sheep's head before. This could be anglers who have a lot of experience catching other fish, trout, snapper, all that. I try to describe it's like you got to feel the weight of the fish almost. Like the taps, are telling you got something interesting. And like you said, you feel that tension or the rod tip start to go down a little bit longer. Call it like feeling the weight of the fish. But then what happens is the first time somebody gets one, they're like, so that's what it feels like, And then they tend to get a lot better.
We've got some questions.
And the
that
coolest
they're
thing about it is they
backing
light
in
you
there.
up. Normally, they light you up. They're not it's not a speckled trout.
So Justin's asking, what depth of water do you suggest for sheep's head on rock piles throughout the bay? So let's assume he's talking about.
There's several
backcountry
rock
stuff.
piles in different. From 9 feet to 18 feet.
For the guy just out hunting that hasn't had any experience or has a spot, one of the things, and we talk about this from time to time, is how the fish transition through our bay through different seasons. And so if you've got a mangrove snapper fishing spot, if you've got a grouper spot, those areas would be the first places that I would go to try to sheep's head fish.
Yes.
Because that same type of environment, that same type of structure is going to be where these aggregations of fish are going to go to spawn.
They're going to take over.
Okay, and they're going to be there this time of year. So 2 that I would suggest, or 3 that I would suggest right off the bat would be our 2 main reefs inside the bay, which is the Port Manatee Reef and the Bahia Beach Reef. Between those 2 reefs,
St. Pete Reef if you're on the other side.
St. Pete Reef if you're on that side, but also the Skyway Bridge.
Yeah.
The Skyway Bridge is an excellent place to catch sheep's head. It's a little tougher to target just sheep's head, but fishing that rig, you're going to mix in those
Your
snappers.
line is going to be bent. Your rod's going to be bent.
You're going to mix in some of those bigger sheep's head.
Go sheep's head fishing at the Skyway. You're going to have
I would
fish on
say
the
if
end
you're
of it all day.
fishing bridges,
Yeah.
the closer you are to the pylons, the closer you are to that structure, you're going to increase your odds for catching sheep's head. A lot of times, the sheep's head are sitting and feeding on the structure, unless there's stuff on the bottom. But if you just got pylons that's got growth on it, and there's not a lot of bottom structure, then you're going to want to be right on where the oysters and the the vegetation for them is. So water depth isn't as critical as I would say, underwater topography and food source. you want to sort of be where the fish are going to be, and that's kind of locating, that oysters and rocks and places where they're going to feed at.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Scott's got to be freezing, and Tony don't have no experience with that, buddy.
Any suggestions for fishing sheep's head from the beach with a strong inlet current? I mean, the only thing that you can really do is go to like a knocker style rig and try to fish the bottom, because drift fishing, or you may be better off like snook fishing or mackerel fishing, something like that with a tide related species. My opinion, sheep's head fishing, I mean, like if you drift a shrimp, the odds of you catching a sheep's head are probably not as good as letting it sit on the bottom and let that fish sort of come to it.
And I don't know how many numbers you're going to have on the beach. Numbers of sheephead on the beach. I mean,
I would imagine though,
there's a few sheephead
well,
out
I can
there,
say
but
like
there's
for
just
instance
really
in Clearwater on the jetty.
Yeah.
Well, now jetty's different. Now jetty and beach to me is a lot different.
Well, he said strong inlet current, so I don't know if you're fishing in the inlet or off the edges, but and here again, in saying that, that's sort of an opinion because I don't do a lot of beach fishing.
Me neither.
I have noticed
especially not for
that there's things that happen on the beach that we don't necessarily see in the bay, like certain migrations and certain things may happen where I know like whiting and so even the snook and redfish and stuff. Like there's people that have that sort of thing dialed in to where they fish those transitions of those fish getting out there on the beach, and so there may be a migration of sheep's head that say come out of like St. Pete and that places to go offshore, to go spawn on the nearshore reefs, and that may be something that I don't know about. So.
I don't know. I just was when I hear beach, I was just thinking.
He said
beach.
big pass. I mean, I'm not sure.
I would look for rocks on the beach.
Yeah,
Any
rocks
kind of
and
structure.
Or there's a lot of nearshore, artificial reefs and wrecks, and I'm sure that could be a possibility. But from the beach,
Chances are going to be low on the beach.
Yeah. I
probably
wouldn't be on the beach and
go
like
find the
casting.
bridge.
Well, that's
in
not
the-
what I mean. I mean, I just think
Yeah.
about tarpon fishing on the beach.
Yeah.
And snook fishing on the beach,
Yeah.
and you can go 2,000 yards and never see a stone.
Yeah.
Right.
Let
Yeah.
alone a rock. So that's just what was in my mind when I read that.
Yep.
Forgive me, boys.
The other, so we talked a little bit about kind of that bay fishing. So odds are, if you're anything like me, especially when I was just doing it on the week, fishing on the weekends, you're probably going to, a lot of our audience, I'm going to assume, is resorting to sheep's head fishing when conditions eliminate their ability to do everything else.
Just like us.
Right? So in that scenario, we talked about it, like bay fishing is out of the equation. So now let's shift to kind of backcountry, whether it's residential canals, and let's talk about that habitat and what you're looking for. I mean, what's key for you?
Well, the nice thing about that is you can get residual fish of you can catch redfish or small snapper.
Of course.
Just kind of a bycatch if you're sheephead fishing. It would be the good part about that. I've never gone into the river thinking we're gonna just whack the sheephead today.
Right.
I just I guess not good enough at it. I don't know. I just don't do that.
Because for me,
You and me both.
I've caught several in the river. Swash points
Yeah.
were a big one, and the bends in the river.
Yeah, that's the
The
day you
deep
told me I
points.
didn't have enough patience.
First
The-
off,
I mean that
When you were whacking them.
one specific area right there.
You were.
But the unique part about that is there's
I
a
went
lot
by
of,
him like 6 times. At the end of the day, he's like, dude, where were you going? I was
I
trying to
remember
find a
that
bite. And
one.
he's
I remember
like,
that story.
you don't have no patience.
yeah.
But he
uh,
holds up all these fish.
there's a lot of structure there though.
There
so
is.
that
There
was
is.
sort of a
What I
different
see
scenario.
in like Upper Tampa Bay. So for me, the benefit of the Upper Tampa Bay area, like you talked about, is a lot of that industrial factor. That the South Shore, when you start getting south of Apollo Beach into that Cockroach area or Little Manatee, you don't have that industrial area. Like these huge piles of rocks at every turn. So if in that scenario and how I've had to acquire my own sheep's head fishing spots, I really look for the ugliest, most dilapidated, oldest looking pieces of structure I can find.
Makes total sense.
And start there, because they're just going to have years and years of more growth and more familiarity to the sheep's head when they return there. So if that's something you're going to do in that upper portion of the bay, is I'm sure you've run by hundreds of places that you've seen that said, "Jeez, it looks really old and
Yeah.
nasty, and that dock is sunk and it's getting worse every year."
That's what
There
they
you
like.
go. That's
Yeah.
it. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah. It sort of boils back to, we talk about residential canals.
Yeah.
So like, what do you look for? And just like you said, and we talked about this, a few weeks ago when we were talking about snook. How do we look? How do you pick a snook dock? How do you pick, that area on a canal of docks? And I think it's very similar to what we said there. The dock that's broken down, that's half in the water. The pylons, they've replaced them 3 times, and there's one, oyster encrusted thing there, and there's one laying down in the bottom. All that vegetation is really what you look for to find those
100%.
fish in those areas. Depth, I think, is critical too. Like, there's a couple areas where the deep hole holds those fish. Like, you'll come down a canal, it kind of turns and bends, and then maybe off one of the points there's like a deep swash point or a deeper hole that sits there. And several different times I've fished spots like that and just pull sheep's head out left and right. If you threw off to the edge where it was, on the edge of the canal or whatever, you wouldn't. So that's a couple of different little tips or like things that maybe that I would look for. But
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. And what I've tended to find is like I will say that water can clear up really quick. And my biggest, instrument in success is just really choosing that leader right. I mean, I've seen it where I'll have some rigs that are for redfish and snooking and stuff that have 25 on them. And I mean, right beside it, the change to 20. I mean, one person to the next is monumental to the point where that is like the biggest piece of advice I have when you sheep's head fish like I do. And in the shallow water, I don't do a lot of the bay sheep's head fishing.
It's not as critical out there.
Right.
So it's certainly not like snapper fishing.
You've got those black crabs, those mangrove crabs, which are a good alternative bait, which are what I've found, if you need to catch them yourself, are a lot easier, especially if the ability to do it at night. But, there's nothing like a fiddler crab. I've seen sheep's head on a fiddler
Mussels
where
are
you're
even
sight
better.
fishing them.
They like
where
mussels
I've
even
seen
better. You just can't get them no more.
Yeah, you can't get them really. But I've seen some sheep's head that have refused a lot of baits turn on a dime as they watch a fiddler coming down, sinking in the water column. And,
it has always amazed me because a fiddler's not that big, man. They're little tiny things.
What's tough is in our line of work, or for even anybody, is a source to get.
Yeah.
They used to
Fiddler
be
crabs.
plentiful. Not no more.
No, they're just not around, man.
Well,
So-
Jason's got some stuff that on a tournament before we run out of time here, and I know
Yeah,
you got.
and we
got
to talk about the ghost trap.
You got the ghost trap thing. Can we touch on that?
Yeah, definitely. You want to kick us off with?
Yeah, so
stuff?
Brian's Fishing Club activities for 2019. They've got some tournaments coming up. Good buddy of ours, Kirk, real good buddy of Rick's. I met him through Rick. He has a lot of fun. He's in the club. He fishes the tournaments and had passed some of that stuff on, and we're able to get it out. They've got their monthly meeting is on January 9th, Wednesday, which is already passed. Thinking about this. February 13th is their next monthly meeting. They got a tournament. Can't read what it is. Battle of something.
Yeah.
But it's on February 16th, and going into March, they've got a cookout at E.G. Simmons, and we'll just go through April here.
They're pretty active. They
Yeah.
got
Yeah,
something
they have
going.
something
Tournament is on April 13th. Longest spotted sea trout, and
It's
another
Henry,
tournament
right?
longest.
Henry Kirkland?
Yeah.
He goes by Kirk.
We
though.
should.
Longest
He
Spanish
sent some
mackerel.
flyers to the shop on these tournaments, so I know we've got them in an email. But that one for February, I know there's 2 that are coming up pretty soon. But that one in February, we should try to help get some of that info out.
Yeah.
So Henry, if you're watching, feel free to. You can message one of us. If not, the next time I'm in the shop, I'll try to get to that and post that up for you and get the specifics on it. We also have
Battle of the Species Challenge.
Battle of the Species Challenge. I knew it was something battle. But we've also got the Ghost Trap Rodeo, which is out of most of our necks of the woods there, out of the Little Manatee, out of E.G.
Simmons Park.
January 19th. So to keep it short and sweet, I'll tell you if you want to get more.
Which is this Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Saturday. If you want to get more information, their website. Where do I have their website?
I think it's Oceans.
Oceanaid
360.
Oceanaid360.org. We had them on as guests. It's a really cool thing they're doing. Especially yesterday, I ran into a ghost trap. Thank God I was, on idling, but I ran into and Glad it was one of those soft coated ones too.
Yeah.
So
You
is
know?
that considered like pre-fishing?
I was pre-fishing. You could have definitely said, listen, I went out and did some artificials and some prop testing on a day
that
off
legal?
yesterday. If anybody's going to fish that tournament, you know, it's a long run from the Little
Hey, if
Manatee,
you
but
need
I
some
can
insight,
put you
man,
on,
I got.
I can put you on
You
a
won't be
couple
skunked.
schools of ghost
Yeah.
traps.
You
Yeah,
won't be
a
skunked.
couple schools. I got them pretty fired up too. But definitely check that out, man. That's a cool initiative going on, and it really seems to be focused in our general area.
Yeah.
So this is the Little Manatee's time to shine. So definitely get on that, oceanaid360.org. Justin, I saw your question about bait in the Upper Bay, man. I wish I had some like really good news for you, but bait has been very difficult up there. Even during the warming trend, it wasn't easy. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you're gonna have to invest a lot of time in order to do that. Time that you'd probably be better invest throwing a paddle tail or getting some shrimp and doing some homework and locating fish themselves, because what I can tell you is not just me, but the guys that I'm talking to up there, they're not having any problems getting fish to eat shrimp. They're actually talking about having problems getting fish to eat whitebait up there. So that's something to think about. But yes, if you want to invest some time, pay attention to the birds, man, around the bridges, and start there is where I'd tell you the flats are going to be just too inconsistent right now. It's all weather dependent. I can tell you right now with this water temperature, it's not happening on the flats.
Yeah. Well, guys, that about wraps it up for this this week's show.
Sure does.
We got about 2 minutes left. One of the things that we hadn't really talked about, and it's something that we've all been talking
Well, we've
about.
talked about it at length. It's not on the show.
Just not on the show. Is we've got some really cool stuff that we've been working on coming into 2019. We've got some new things that we're going to be doing with the show. We've got some surprises for you guys as the audience going forward this year. Sort of in the works. We're kind of fine-tuning that,
Yeah.
sharpening the pencil. Really going to have something neat to roll out for 2019. So if you haven't liked our page, if you're just watching this video, go ahead and click the like and follow button down on our Facebook page. We're also got
Or do us a really big solid, share it.
Yeah.
share the video. That's another one too. You can share the video and help us out, get the word out there that couple 4 local fishing
Yeah,
dudes
every
are
now
trying
and then
to.
we kind of know what
And
we're talking about.
2019 is going to be a lot more interactive.
We got some
Yeah.
cool stuff going on, exciting events coming up, a lot of different changes in the show that we're going to be doing to hopefully benefit you guys a little bit more. But stay tuned for that. Like I said, if you haven't liked or shared our page, our videos, go ahead and do that. And stay tuned because we got some really cool stuff coming up in the next few weeks, guys.
And speaking of interactive, I'm ready to interact with some chicken wings.
Let's go
You
get on
ain't
them
lying,
chicken
buddy.
wings.
All right.
Guys, we appreciate you watching for another week of Tampa Fishing Outfitters Live Fishing Report. Tight lines.
Yep. Good luck.
Out.
Watch the weather this weekend. We were talking about being safe.
Yeah.
There's potentially some really rough weather out there. Please keep a close eye on it. Make the right call.
See you guys.